Well, hey there, sweet peas. Welcome back to Friendless. I'm your host, James Avramenko, and it is officially August, the best month of the year. The sun's out, the days are long, my birthday's just around the corner, so what better way to kick off the month than with a little bit of a solo catch-up episode? I'm going to try touching on creative burnout, reframing the insidious word capacity, hitting yet another sobriety milestone, and of course, pro wrestling, baby. So let's get into it. It's time to lean back, get comfy, set your volume at a reasonable level, and enjoy my solo episode to kick off August here on Friendless. So right off the bat, I feel like I gotta own that, I missed the last couple weeks. There's been no emergency, no great scandal. It's just kind of been life. Traditionally, I end up taking July, August off from the show. And I feel like I've been reminded why, because my regular work really ramps up in the summer, and I just don't have the priorities and the space for those priorities as I want to. But it really has reminded me of one of these things I often think of and try to sort of chew on, is this idea of the pressure for creative work in this kind of algorithm driven world is unreal, and anyone who tries to push back on that, in my opinion, is committing a radical act. And it really comes down to this difficult balancing act, because the thing is that this show is kind of like my baby. I love doing it. It feeds me creatively, emotionally. It's helped me kind of make sense of the world in a way. And I'm also just one guy. I'm the host, I'm the editor, I'm the social media manager, I'm the marketing, whatever it is. I'm the guy doing it all. And this isn't me trying to evoke sympathy or anything like that. It's just me reminding myself that my priorities are allowed to shift, and I do not have to hold myself to these artificial standards that these social media platforms have created in order to maximize their profits. They want creators to be churning out all the time as much as possible, so that the metrics reflect well on them. People go to their platforms. It's not for the benefit of the artist. It's for the benefit of the advertisers. They create this kind of insidious belief that if you're not constantly creating, constantly posting, constantly engaging, then you are a failure. And they have created this image that success is tied only to constant amplified visibility. If you're not top of the feed, then you're falling behind. And for me personally, that chase just doesn't work. I just don't want to play that game, because that game is exhausting and it's relentless. And more to the point, it's just simply not sustainable. So I've been reminding myself that, this show is not a product on a conveyor belt. It's not content to be optimized. It's a mindful space. It's a space that I get to speak authentically, for myself, to other people. It's a place for reflection, a place for experimentation, and that means something. It means something to me. It means something to what I put out in the world. It also means sometimes I just need a little bit of a breather, right? Sometimes inspiration just kind of needs to simmer a little bit. And I get it. I'm not breaking any new ground here. I'm not the first person to talk about creative burnout, but what I'm trying to do differently is how I personally respond to it. I'm actively not going to, flog myself for stepping back for a week or two. I'm not going to shame myself or push out more content just so that I can remain visible if it's half-baked or if it isn't exactly what I intend it to be. And I mean, shit, if that means the show grows slowly, cool. If some people unsubscribe or because I missed a week or two, that's fine. I'd much rather have a couple actively engaged listeners than thousands who are just kind of scrolling by anyway. So, I'm not trying to get on my high horse here, but one of the places that this really came into focus for me over the last year has been on TikTok. I've had videos where I've posted and nothing's happened. I've posted some and they've exploded, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of rhyme or reason to it. It's basically like the lottery in a lot of ways. And so for me personally, the effort that goes into a video that gets 100 views or a video that gets 1 million is this same amount, and that tells me that this is just roulette. And I can't bring myself to keep on pulling the lever, because it's my desire to create with intention, not just out of compulsion. And I don't know, maybe you're somebody who was struggling with something similar and you needed someone like me to say, like, hey, it's okay to take a step back. It's okay to pause. Nobody's in danger if a podcast episode doesn't come out on time, right? No one's life is being threatened if you don't make that TikTok post. But so like that's the energy I'm bringing to the party these days. So let's say I've set the table here, and we can move into some of the sort of deeper thoughts I've been chewing on. First thing is something that's come out of some therapy sessions recently that has really been kind of rattling around in my mind, and it's this word, capacity. I have used this word. I have heard it used. I think everyone has thrown it out in some way, shape, or form, in some capacity. Over the recent, couple of years, it's become really popular. We say things like, oh, I'd love to, but I just don't have capacity right now. I'm at capacity. It's become this kind of like polite shorthand, this sort of like the socially acceptable way of saying I can't, or I won't, or, I don't want to. And when you sit with it, it sounds responsible. It sounds like it's, emotionally intelligent. And on face value, it seems to be signaling, I'm not ghosting you. I'm just tapped out. But here's where, my therapist, shout out Scott, as always, love you. Where he stepped in, we were having a session a couple weeks ago. I don't know how long ago this was now, but and we were kind of celebrating some of my accomplishments and some of the really, really deep work that I've implemented and is like very clearly sticking, and like how good I'm doing. And then I started slipping into yet another kind of woe is me moment, and I started saying, I want to do all this stuff, but I'm at capacity. And he offered a very gentle kind of reframe where he asked me, would you be up for a new challenge? And I said, yeah, sure, of course. And he said, what if you stopped using the word capacity altogether? And like, at first I kind of thought it was a bit of a joke, but then his reasoning was really sound, and it's something that's really stuck with me, because he was saying when you actually sit with this word, it's nonsense the way we're using it. And it actually is really insidious, and it's whether it's consciously or unconsciously quite manipulative, because what it's doing is it's allowing us to avoid saying what we actually mean. Because to get really pedantic, stay with me here, our actual capacity doesn't change. It's sort of, think of like a gas tank, right? The gas tank stays the same. What you have the capacity to handle doesn't actually change. What changes is how much fuel is in it. So when I say I don't have capacity, what I'm really doing is two things at once. I'm avoiding honestly answering a question, and I'm also shifting the emotional labor onto the other person. So, okay, let me give you an example. Someone invites me to a party, and I say, "Oh, I'm at capacity this weekend." I've now made them responsible for comforting me. So I've asked them to hold space for my supposed depletion, when in reality, what I actually want to say is, I don't want to go to your party. And that's not a judgment. That's not, oh, because you're bad. It's just, it's just the truth. I don't want to. But instead of saying, no thanks, I don't want to, or it's just not something I want to do, or whatever you want to say. I'm now using this really polished, therapeutic sounding language to dodge discomfort. And, that's what we call people pleasing, right? It's a people pleaser with a thesaurus, right? And I get it. I mean, the reason I'm calling this out is because I do it. We're trying to navigate setting boundaries without hurting people, but when those boundaries get blurred under this kind of pseudotherapy speak, like with the word capacity, we're not actually being kind. We're being unclear, and that is completely unfair to everyone involved. It's that tweet that you might have seen floating around where it's like, oh, you're a people pleaser? Name 3 people who are pleased with you, right? Like, people pleasing is so useless because there's a difference between protecting your peace and just being an avoidant, right? And so this idea of oh, I'm just going to say the thing that will keep them settled, but that's really a form of psychological abuse if you want to get hyperbolic with it, because that is a way to politely lie to each other. So instead, I'm leaning into just direct but kind communication. And instead of, saying, oh, I can't, but whatever, I just say like, hey, thank you so much for the invite. I'm not feeling social right now, or, it's just not something I'm up for. But I really appreciate the thought. And yeah, it's a lot scarier, but it's also clearer. It's honest, and it gives the other person real information. And when you start treating adults as adults, you'll find that they really appreciate that, because we all collectively can see that these statements are bullshit, but for whatever reason, we're not calling it out, because on the other side, the other person is just as afraid of conflict, right? So it creates this weird, murky, like, friends but not really friends, because we're not ever actually speaking truthfully or authentically to each other. And I mean, what could be less authentic than if we can't just speak directly to each other? How could you possibly trust this connection if you can tell that the other person is dressing up their answers in these costumes that don't actually reflect the intention behind them? I don't know if it's some one of my ransom letters, what I don't know if it's my autism or my whatever, or if it's just the fact that I am a writer. I don't know what it is, but to me, language matters. It shapes how we show up in the world. It shapes how we understand the world and how we understand ourselves. It shapes how we treat each other. And when we misuse it, even if it's with good intentions, we end up confusing everything. Language is already imprecise enough. We don't need to be actively muddying the waters with our sort of obfuscating language. Another sort of version of that, a kind of another angle, is how we talk to ourselves. Something like if we were to frame when we frame our choices as failures, right? I made a mistake, I screwed up. What we're doing is we end up burying ourselves in shame, and shame leads to hiding, right? Shame doesn't teach someone not to do something; it teaches them how to hide that thing going forward. So if instead of castigating yourself and saying, "Oh, you made a mistake, why did you do that?" instead you say, "Well, you know what? That didn't turn out the way I hoped. But I made the best choice I had with the information I had. Now I get to make a different decision," right? So instead of framing them as failures, just framing them as decisions that didn't have the outcome you wanted. What that does is it encourages curiosity, and it encourages space for growth and for experimentation and for trying again. It invites compassion for yourself, and then you are able to show up compassionately for others. And that all stems from clarity and honesty. And that's what I'm really trying to lean into, not just one or the other, but both. Being clear, being honest, and remaining kind behind that. So if you ever hear yourself saying you're at capacity, I'm not trying to say like you're wrong and you're bad, but if you catch yourself saying that, I would invite you to ask yourself, what do you actually mean here? And what would it look like if you just said that instead? It's hard. I get it. It's really, really vulnerable, but it's also really liberating. As Scott has said in the past, you cannot be authentic without being vulnerable, and you cannot be vulnerable without risking being killed, because you have to show your soft bits. And so I would really encourage you, that doesn't mean show your belly to everyone, but like I would really encourage you to show your belly to the people who aren't going to hurt you. And if you're really that afraid, then that's actually a deeper moment that you should be exploring around that connection. And that kind of leads me into my next thought. This is kind of a little bit of a puppy pile of a couple of thoughts, but I wanted to kind of reflect on. I'm about to hit 2 years sober, and one of the ways I celebrated recently was going to a big Pride event. It was Pride in Vancouver this last weekend, and I went and I did this event completely sober. It was a daytime party at the Birdhouse. It was amazing. It was so much fun, and it really sent me down a new rabbit hole of exploration of kind of what sobriety means and what my relationship to these substances was, and how do I describe that to myself and to the world. Because it's been a long 2 years. I'll say that much. 2 years without alcohol or substances that I used to use as my not only my social lubrication, but also my coping mechanisms. And I've spent the last 2 years really, really diligently analyzing myself and figuring out who it is I am and who it is I want to become, without being able to numb myself or close any piece of reality off from my nervous system. And I think I want to sidebar here. As I talk about this, this isn't going to be one of those like, here's how I did it and I've got the answer. And I also really don't want to come across like I'm finger wagging at anybody, because I do not believe that sobriety is a moral imperative. I genuinely believe that people can have a healthy relationship with basically any substance. Weed, alcohol, black tar, heroin, whatever's in White Claw. I don't know. I don't care what it is. That doesn't mean, a healthy relationship doesn't mean constant user, right? What it means is they have some kind of healthy connection where they're drawing what they need from that substance and then putting it away. And I couldn't do that. And the way I've started describing it is that I was in yet another abusive relationship. I was in an abusive relationship with drugs and alcohol. And I, in that relationship, was the abuser. I was the one misusing these tools. And I wasn't listening to what they could offer. And instead, I was using them for what they couldn't. And that was leading to problems. And in that abusive cycle, I lost my right to that relationship. And I had to close the door on that one. And this Pride event really drove that home for me, because I was terrified. I was dreading it. Not because I thought like, I was going to relapse, but more because it was like, am I going to be able to have any fun? And the truth was, it was an absolute fucking joy. I saw people I hadn't seen in ages. I danced. I reconnected, and I was sober the whole time, just having the absolute time of my life. And the best part of it was that it wasn't performative. It wasn't, I wasn't gritting my teeth. I wasn't just like trying to stay good. It was, I wasn't white knuckling anything. I was just genuinely present. And like, there was a ton of anxiety. I was terrified of who I was going to see. I was terrified of how I was going to be perceived. I didn't know if people were going to, accept me there, or if there were going to be old judgments or resentments or whatever. And like, there were a couple of those, but also like, whatever, if you're going to look, if you're going to be burning your own calories, holding a grudge over something that happened 2 years ago, that's your energy to waste. I have nowhere interested in it anymore. But that's the sidebar. But really, what ended up landing for me was most surprisingly was that I didn't feel like by being sober I was missing out on anything. I didn't look around and think, oh, I'd be having more fun if I was drinking. If anything, I felt like I was having the most fun because I was there. I was present. I was dancing. I was laughing. I was connecting. I was talking. I was and I also I did this thing on the dance floor where I sort of almost did like a kind of like a little bit of a method acting thing where I basically just sort of like imagined what it used to feel like to be high or tipsy or whatever, and I just let myself kind of play that, and it really worked. I danced, I let loose, I got weird. I because I wasn't relying on something else to give me that feeling. I was giving it to myself. And it reminded me that, the desire wasn't really for the substance itself. The desire was for the feeling. And I, 2 years removed, have through practice and through trial and error found ways to give myself that feeling without needing the shortcuts. I will also say, actually, sunglasses. Sunglasses changed my life. Absolute game changer. I got a pair of prescription sunglasses for the first time this year, and I know it sounds really silly, but honestly, as someone on the spectrum, there is something completely magical about having my eyes hidden. It made me feel a lot like safer and less exposed, like I was kind of like in my own little bubble, and that made public spaces like this event just so much more manageable. So I would really strongly recommend, if you're ever feeling nervous, just throw some sunglasses on. You'll be right as rain. But all this really got me thinking about how my relationship to my sobriety continues to shift. At the very beginning, it was survival. But as the years have gone on, it's become much more about clarity. And for me now, it's about, I guess I could call it honesty or like authenticity. But it isn't like a purity test. My sobriety isn't about like I'm keeping myself pure. It's more about like keeping myself aligned, and making sure I'm not making choices that are going to hide me from myself, and are not going to encourage me lying to myself. And that's really what I've been holding on to. And I want to be really clear. Like, if you have your own relationship with these substances, or if you're struggling in a relationship, there's no shame involved here. It's not a failing on anybody's part. You're just a human, and there's no right way to sort through any of this. There's just sort of the way that works for you. For me, it took having a full-scale nervous breakdown, and then really actively and mindfully building myself back up, just piece by piece. And I'm still building. That it's not like the construction's done, right? But at the moment, where I've gotten to is when I show up, whether it's at a party, in a conversation, in this podcast, whatever it is, I can really proudly and really confidently declare that it's me showing up. It's just me. And that feels like something that I'm incredibly proud of, and I'm only finally truly reaping the benefits of. So I wanted to plant that seed, and I wanted to plant the pedantic seed earlier, because I wanted to marry these two kind of worlds together. And I want to talk a little bit about the power of words in the culture wars. So, okay. Stay with me on this one. It's going to get a little aggressive. I've been thinking a lot about language. Nerd, I know. But I think often about how words, and the words that we choose, they're not just tools, but they're blueprints. They build how we think, and then how we relate to ourselves and to each other, and how we understand ourselves and our world. I just recently reread On Tyranny, which is this tiny little book that basically warns about how authoritarianism sneaks into society. And one of its points really stuck with me. It talked about avoid repeating overly common phrases, because once language gets flattened, it becomes a slogan. It loses its meaning, and then it becomes just propaganda for whatever part of the spectrum you're on. Words like woke, right? Even the words freedom, right? What does it mean to see a Canadian flag waving after the last couple of years, right? These words used to mean something, and now they've been weaponized, they've been memed, they've been kind of hollowed out until nobody really knows what they even stand for anymore. So I've been trying to be really deliberate in how I use my language, not in a kind of like gatekeeper way, but in a curiosity way. I'm not trying to police other people. I'm just trying to be curious about how I use language, and I've started to really unpack where words come from. What they meant before we all started kind of flinging them around in Instagram captions and political rants, and and where I started was a real hot button word, fascism. Light topic, right? So the word fascism and fascist is actually, relatively speaking, to the English language, a really new word. It only really came into play kind of around the 1920s, when kind of Mussolini and his cronies were trying to link their right-wing authoritarian party to the kind of glory days of ancient Rome. And what he did was he borrowed the symbol of the fascists or the fasces. I don't know. It's Latin. It's a dead language. Who knows? But what the fasci was a bundle of rods or sticks tied together. Sometimes there was like an axe in the middle, but it was meant to represent strength through unity, right? Like, look how strong these sticks are when they're bound together. And what struck me when I then started researching the word fasces is that it actually is the sort of parent word to a few other very popular words that we use. One being fajita, strips of meat tied together in a delicious tortilla or some other wrap, and faggot. And now, okay, we're about to get even spicier, so please bear with me. The word faggot is a word that I have a very complicated relationship with. As a queer person, I have been called that from everyone from friends, family members, junior high bullies, you name it. Somebody has called me that at some point in multiple stages of my life. The thing is, a faggot is just a bundle of sticks. It is yet again another symbol of strength through unity. The original intention, the original definition, was literally that. It was a bundle of sticks tied together for burning fuel. There's a sort of a linguistic urban legend that they would use these bundles to burn gay men alive, hence the slur. But the much darker truth is that despite homosexuality being a capital punishment in England until the 20th century, hangings were the prescription of the day for most of history. The thinking was, why waste the wood when you've got that nice cord of rope? And the really frustrating piece in my research is that I couldn't find a definitive answer of how this slur came to be. But okay, so let me stay on point. This is where my kind of like very, very aggressive, yes, satirical proposal comes into play, which I totally acknowledge is controversial and is going to get me a lot of hate mail, and I probably shouldn't even say it out loud, but hey, here we are. So if the fascists of the world are no longer offended by being called fascists, if they're embracing it, celebrating it, did you see the video of that guy who debated 30 right-wingers and they were gleefully giggling about being fascist? Then I would argue it's time to rebrand. And I think we need a new word that is going to upset them a little bit more. So while maintaining the same intention of the lineage and the etymology, I propose that we start calling fascists faggots. What if we took the sting of the queer slur and instead kind of created a little bit of like a linguistic boomerang? Take that old insult, spin it around, and point it at those who are actively trying to oppress us. What if we used their own rigidity and their fear of their otherness against them? And yeah, I mean, the joke I'm making here is what if we threw that insult back at them? But the truth is, when you actually look at the etymology of the word, it's a compliment. It is about how we are more powerful together, and it should never have become the slur that it's known as today. If it's going to be used for anything, it should be used as a word of empowerment and a word of celebration for the amount of work that it takes to collectively build a world that we actually want to live in and that we can all thrive and not just barely survive within. And, look, at the end of the day, the point isn't really to shift the insult. The point is to get us thinking. How much power do we give words? And, a word like fascism used to be a huge red flag, and now it's a brand. So, we need to think about how language is evolving, and if we don't pay attention, how we are going to be manipulated by that language, because words matter. And that's not even academic or detached. Just look at the world right now. Look at the language being used to justify genocides, to rewrite history, to mask oppression behind polite corporate slogans. Words don't just describe the world, they create it. And we are long past the stage of, I wonder if something bad might happen. When we have secret police rounding up sovereign citizens and deporting them or taking them to secret prisons, the bell has been rung. When we have active proof of an ongoing national genocide happening in Gaza, if you ever wondered what would you have done in 1930s Germany, ask yourself, what did you do today? Because you're living in the exact same time period. So it's time to get real serious about this stuff. And I know this is tongue in cheek, and at the same time too, I'm trying to elicit something more than just a guffaw and a move on. We have to do something. We have to shift because this is not working. So go out there and punch a fajita. Fuck's sake. So moving from one decrepit white male problem into another, I wanted to briefly talk a little bit about Hulk Hogan. Uh-oh. Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, I went to the season finale of Boom Pro Wrestling. It was at the Commodore. It was everything I love about wrestling. The camp, the drama, the storytelling, the cheering. One of my favorite wrestlers literally threw her broken necklace at me as a gift. my other favorite wrestler, former guest of the show, Ravenous Randy, they actually used one of the fans that my partner made for the show in a spot in the match. It was incredible. It was unbelievable. And in the middle of that spectacle, I had this sort of bizarre existential moment, because Hulk Hogan is dead. Ding tong. It's fucking great. Let's be clear. He was a piece of shit. He was racist. He was awful. He destroyed unionization plans for wrestlers in the 80s. He never, he was an awful, awful human being. He was essentially the walking embodiment of everything you could do wrong in positions of power. I don't miss him. I don't mourn him. And at the same time, too, the piece that I was trying to reconcile with was that not a single person would have been in the Commodore that night if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan. And that is really complicated. And it's a complexity that I am trying to sit with, because I find that there is this sort of cultural reflex to just erase problematic people, right? It's like, if we just pretend they never existed, then somehow that protects us. But it doesn't. It makes us dumber. It blinds us to patterns, and it flattens history into fairy tales. The ancient Egyptians used to do this thing where they, if a pharaoh was, disgraced for whatever reason, they would literally chisel their face off the monuments. But what that ended up doing is just make future historians go, "Ooh, who's this mysterious erased guy? I better look into them." It just made the story more compelling, not less. And we are doing that all the time right now. The sort of quote unquote, whatever you want to call it, the cancel culture or whatever, what it does is it's being weaponized to flatten people into just pure good and pure evil. And once somebody falls into one of these camps, especially if they fall into the evil camp, then we pretend like they never contributed anything worth remembering. And I can't buy that, because the uncomfortable truth, on topic, Hulk Hogan fundamentally changed pro wrestling. He helped globalize wrestling. He built the stage that now countless others are dancing on. And yes, he caused real, genuine harm. The thing is, both of these things can be true. That doesn't mean we have to celebrate him, but it does mean we can't pretend he didn't exist. Because when you erase people, you also erase the chance to learn. And if we don't learn, then we're going to be repeating the same old bullshit. It's just going to be in maybe a shinier package, but it's always going to come back if we don't address it and shine the light on it. I'm not trying to advocate forgiveness. I'm not trying to say let's make excuses for it. I'm saying let's examine it. Let's confront it, and let's look at the entire story. Because this behavior, it goes way beyond just wrestling, right? Think about, Michael Jackson, Picasso, writers, actors, directors, musicians, just creators. These people who have shaped our lives, but who were also messy abusers or worse. And I don't really know what exactly we can do with that right now, but I do know the answer isn't just pretend they didn't exist, because it doesn't teach us anything. It doesn't help us build a better culture. What it does is it just creates a vacuum where other newer monsters will sneak in. So yeah, Hulk Hogan sucked ass, but his impact was very real. And now it's up to us not to sanitize that, but to understand it and to grow from it. And that actually dovetails right into this other piece. I feel like these are like, in internet speak, these are ancient history, but I haven't recorded since this stuff happened. So the other piece that I've been observing is, the story with the CEO who got caught at the Coldplay concert and suddenly his life was destroyed. Again, to start the story, fuck that guy. I don't give a shit about him. This is not what I'm trying to advocate for. I'm not trying to say, oh, think of the children or anything like that. The thing was, within minutes of that clip being on the internet, people had figured out who he was, his name, his job, his marital status, everything blasted on the internet. His life exploded, and we just watched. And that is haunting to me. I don't give a fuck about the moral implications. I don't care about infidelity. I don't care about marriage. Whatever. What got me was how fast a private citizen's life became a global punchline, and how comfortable we all were with that. That's the thing that terrifies me. Because at the end of the day, it's not about that guy. He could have been an asshole. He could have been a dreamboat. It doesn't matter. What matters is that story proves that we have normalized this kind of digital surveillance where everyone is now a public figure waiting to be punished. We saw a private citizen have his life annihilated on the world stage for something that, in context, really shouldn't have made it beyond a group chat, And we clapped, and we called it justice. And we said, well, he deserves it. He sucks. He's a CEO. Fuck him, right? And, I get it. I agree. And also at the same time, too, this desire to knock someone down, right? The satisfaction of watching the quote-unquote bad guy, get what's coming. The problem behind that is, once we can justify destroying this person. Who's next? Is it the neighbor who parks weird? Is it the coworker who voted wrong? Is it the ex who broke your heart? Where does it stop? Because we can now say it's okay, he's powerful, but power is relative, and public shame doesn't scale. So what we call accountability, more often than not, just turns into cruelty. And this is not about turn the other cheek, holier than thou. It's about asking ourselves, what kind of world are we building? Because right now, from where, from my vantage point, it looks a whole lot like a panopticon with punchlines. Everybody's watching. Everybody's just waiting for someone else to screw up so that we can then feel better about ourselves. And that is dystopian in its truest sense, in my perspective. And it feels like we're just kind of laughing along with it. Like it's just sort of like part of the scroll, and it's not. And this is why I've been really trying to kind of pull back to not immediately share every headline, every scandal, or take a side in every drama. Because, the moment someone becomes a meme, we strip away any humanity. And the moment we stop seeing people as people, we literally immediately have become the thing that we claim to hate. The real danger behind this story isn't in one guy's shitty behavior. It's in how we behave when we think the rules don't apply or don't apply to, our specific target. Because if in this moment they don't apply to him, then eventually they're going to stop applying to any of us. Okay, I'm stepping off my soapbox. Let's wrap things up. I guess really what all of this boils down to, all these thoughts and all these different stories, is this common thread that, life is messy. And we've really got to get better at sitting with that mess. It really feels like we've become obsessed with these binary black and white thoughts, the good, the bad, hero, villain, right, wrong. And that binary thinking is killing nuance. It's killing empathy. It's making it harder and harder for us to actually talk to each other, let alone to actually grow. And I'm not interested in purity tests. I don't want to know who is to blame. What I want to know is what I can do differently. I want to know how I can show up more effectively going forward. Because that, for me, is the real work. Not in pointing fingers, not in erasing history, not in that, not hoping that some tweet is gonna, fix the world and solve the system. But it's the work in asking every day, what part did I play in this? Even if it's a really small part, even if it's really uncomfortable to admit. Because, and please forgive me for saying this, the truth is, we live in a society, which means that no matter how small you feel your part is, no matter how removed you think you are from a problem, you're still in it. You're still shaping it. You are directly influencing it just as much as the other way around. What you consume, what you share, what you laugh at, what you let slide, all of this contributes to the same problems. And once we start accepting that responsibility, we can stop feeling so fragile. We can stop pretending that, being called out or being told no or whatever it is, is the end of the world. And we can start having actual hard, liberating conversations. Yeah, maybe Hulk Hogan was a human garbage fire, but pretending he didn't exist won't undo his impact. It just means we're never going to learn from it. Maybe that CEO was a piece of shit, but nuking his life won't fix corporate power imbalances or a broken relationship. It's just going to feed our hunger to punish. Maybe you didn't post a podcast for a couple weeks, or maybe you flaked on a friend, or maybe you made a choice you're not proud of. It doesn't make you evil. It just makes you human. And what matters now is what you do next. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not interested in being some, hero. I'm not even really all that interested in being the quote-unquote good guy. I just want to show up honestly, messily, and fully. And I just want to keep trying. And that's what I'm going to invite you to do too. That is going to be it for this week. The next stretch of Friendless is going to be about exploring some of these ideas. I've got a new batch of interviews that I'm recording. I'm in the process of recording. They're going great so far. I cannot wait to share them. I've also got more deep dive solo episodes planned, more focused topics. I've also got some guided workshops that I've been developing that I'm really excited to share. So those are going to be coming down the pipeline very, very, very soon. They're all about exploring friendship, identity, emotional survival, and kind of in-between moments, stuff like that. But if you've got questions, ideas, stories you want to share, please hit me up. Seriously, email me at friendlesspod@gmail.com. Find me on Instagram or TikTok at friendlesspod. Let me know your stories. This podcast is just one piece of a community. It's not perfect, but it is here, and you are a part of it. So, whether you're here for the long haul or you're just dipping your toes in, I'm grateful and I love you. But until next time, sweet peas, as always, fun and safety.